take this conversation a little bit further, we have our good brother, Mr. Darren Muhammad, on the phone. Darren, what's good, bro?
Peace. What's good? Peace to you, Brother Griffin. Peace, of course, to the Queen Zaza Ali. How are you, sister?
Oh, we all right. State of the city, brother Darren
Yes,
Muhammad.
sir.
So what's good, man? Talk to us, good brother. I mean, give us some clarity on some of these things that we're talking about.
Well, you know, brother, as the Most High Elijah Muhammad always said in Malcolm X, that history is best qualified to reward all of our research. In order to understand Ferguson today, you got to understand what was, so you understand what is, so we'll know what could be or shall be. I'll give you a city that Ferguson. Most of the people that came and moved into Ferguson 30 years ago lived in a town called Kinlock, Kinlock. Kinlock was basically cleansed, and all the people from Ferguson were bought out, forced out of their homes from Kinlock and moved into Ferguson. And there's a couple of YouTube clips you can go on. Our good brother Umar Ali has a YouTube clip called Kinlock, and you can view it. It's probably about 15 minutes long, but I think he gives a real good layout of Kinlock, Missouri, and how black people were moved up out of Kinlock, Missouri. The reason they were moved out of Kinlock, Missouri is because the FAA and the federal government forced them off the land because they wanted to expand what was then called the St. Louis Airport. It's now called the St. Louis Lambert Airport. So the people have lived in Ferguson for about the past 30 years, and what they did yesterday, they're getting ready, and as Big Gregory would say, fitting ready to do again all over again. But they needed an impetus to be able to pull this off, and the impetus, of course, is this incident with Michael Brown. But under the auspices of all of this now, we see, of course, FEMA, because St. Louis, as you keep hearing the president say region, you hear Michael Brown's father saying region. Well, you know, Negroes usually who are more akin to living on a slave plantation don't think about region. They just think about their block. They just think about their neighborhood. They think about their hill, up the hill or down the hill. You got the father talking about the region. So it lets you see that he may be tied to something bigger than just his son, Michael Brown, as well. So this is all part of the – go ahead, I'm sorry.
Are we getting a repeat of what happened with Trayvon Martin's dad?
Yeah, it's the same characters that are there. All you got to do is look around. It's the same scheme team. You got, as you mentioned, the bitch Daryl Parks. You got Benjamin Crump. You got Al Sharpton. You got Jesse Jackson. You got Jamal Bryant. You got even some of the same reporters that are there. And then the interesting part is that Trayvon Martin's father is from that part of St. Louis, Tracy Martin. Mm-hmm. So you see almost the same players. And then don't forget, as you talked about, the man who some thought was the Messiah, and now you see he's not the Messiah, but just a pariah, Barack Hussein Obama. So Obama, as I shared with you, the day after the midterm election, you can look it up. None of the American news media even wrote about it. It was in the international press that the day after the midterm elections, Obama had a secret meeting in Ferguson. Now, none of the other, you can pull it up on the internet, Obama's secret visit to Ferguson, in which he met with Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and they said there were a host of other activists that was there, but they don't mention who they were. But it said that Obama told him to stay the course, which is military language. I mean, whatever they're about to do, they're going to pull it off. So, you know, this is bigger than Mike Brown. This is bigger than Ferguson, obviously. And when you look at governor, we have to get a war room so that we can look at all the players involved, as you mentioned, in terms of McCullough, in terms of Jay Nixon. Jay Nixon, of course, is tied to in that region, is FEMA Region 7. And Jay Nixon is the regional governor over that region, which means he's over 4 states, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. So he has enormous power based on what the FEMA and what the military does is cut the country down into 9 regions or 10 regions. Right. And this was signed by Obama, Executive Order 13528, which was signed January 11, 2010. So for those that may be writing, you can look it up for yourself. But so Jay Nixon is definitely a part of this, and I won't get into all the fraternal connections between Jay Nixon, McCullough, because you're really dealing with Freemasonry. We're dealing with, again, Skull and Bones, and we're dealing, again, with Knights of Malta and the Jesuits in terms of, again, Jay Nixon as well. But getting back to what we talked about last night after the quote-unquote the verdict, but we have to be clear that all of that was a done deal. As we always say, the unseen is more powerful than the seen. So all of that was a done deal since August. They knew what was going to be done because there was no pressure put on them. As Dr. King talked about, a redistribution of the pressure in this society, no pressure is put on them in terms of saying to the head of Anheuser-Busch, you better tell your boy Wilson he going to take one for the boys on this one. You better tell McCullough or Nixon we want a special prosecutor, not McCullough handling this case. So there's no pressure put on them, so the die was already set. That they knew what they were going to do. They just needed time to do it and then release it on a Monday night when most people are watching, of course, Monday Night Football. And they gave us two games, the Ravens and the Saints, and then they had, I think it was the Jets and the Bills that were playing. So, you know, they give it 9 o'clock at night, but that was so they could position all their people in place. And again, as you look at what they showed us in terms of this fires and what was burning, all that again was theater that was being given to the media by, again, this company that I shared with you called Risk Solutions, LLC. Right. And this young lady by the name of Erica Arts, who's their spokesperson, but they said she's also a fire marshal, so she's heavily tied to the fire departments. But again, as I shared with you, that on June the 10th, the Ferguson City Council passed a unanimous bill. Then it came back and confirmed it again on June the 24th, which you can look up on their PDF, and which they had voted unanimously to annex 886 acres of that area, which they said was burning. All right?
Now, Brother,
so all that was yes.
I know you, Griff, told me you guys talked earlier, and we've been talking about this extensively. This whole idea of this being a psyops.
Yes.
You know, what's the proper terminology? A psyops.
Psychological operations.
Okay.
Psychological operation, right.
Yeah. Can you, in layman's terms, let our people know what we mean when we talk about psyops, as far as, because to them, you know, black man gets shot, you know, we try to get and killed, we tried to get a trial, you know, they denied us again, it's just racism, it's all on the surface. They don't see all of the underlying aspects of this.
I think when you look at who controls the input, then they can control the output. And I think that's a good example of a psychological operation, as we see in Ferguson, because only certain people are allowed to speak. As you played before I came on, you had Rudy Giuliani and Michael Aaron Dyson. And so you're talking about Dyson, who's a boule, Giuliani, who's a Knight of Malta, and a cross-dresser. Don't let me forget that about Giuliani. A cross-dresser. I mean, you can Google him on YouTube and see him dressed as a woman. I mean, and so everybody knows this issue. So this is how the game is played. So we talk about a psychological operation so that they can control the input, so they can control the output in terms of what the people think they saw, but they really didn't see. It's because they only let the information be introduced to the public that they wanted to be introduced to the public. Then you bring in crisis actors. Unfortunately, you know, as I said to Griff earlier, the first demonstrations back in August, and then the demonstrations last night, I mean, there were more arrests, but there were really no injuries and there were no deaths. Now, I read where a young brother was found murdered in his car this morning, but with all the shooting they claim was going on last night, there was no police officer shot. There was no, and then there's another component we're eventually going to have to introduce to this, and that is, of course, in terms of the street organizations of those brothers that are tied to the Bloods and the Bloods and the Crips that are there, and that part of Missouri as well. Then you have the agent provocateurs that are part of the United States military that's been brought in. Then you have those that's a part of the Department of Justice. They call them DJs. Al Sharpton, if you listen to him, he was using the word defense justices or something like that, defenders of justice. These are people that are sent in from the Department of Justice. They did the same thing in Ferguson. I mean, this was written about in the what's it called? The Orlando Sentinel wrote an article talking about the White House and the Department of Justice sent these people into Ferguson to basically pacify the masses, what they call it, keeping the peace in Ferguson. But this is what's happened, and so this is what Al Sharpton, Jamal Bryant, and others have been sent out to do. The other point I have to mention to you as we expand the envelope a little more and go a little deeper, you got to check out because you always look at, is this a diversion? Is this a distraction from something bigger that's coming down the pipe? Now, while everybody's talking about the Keystone Pipeline, there's another pipeline that's already in the country that's come out of Canada called, and I'll give you the name, it's called Enbridge, ENBRIDGE. Enbridge, BRIDGE. Look that up. Enbridge Energy, which comes out of Canada as well. Guess who the law firm is that represents Enbridge Energy, and it's coming and running it's already come through Illinois. Now they're coming through Missouri as well.
Who's
now,
that?
Guess who the law firm is that represents Enbridge is the law firm out of Chicago named Sidley Austin. And Griff, you know Sidley Austin is the law firm that Obama came out of, and Michelle. Right? That's the gangsters' law firm. They call that the gangsters' paradise. And there's an old saying in Chicago, huh?
That's where they were groomed. Yeah. Okay.
That's where they were groomed. So so you see why Obama's there, right? Obama's looking out for big energy. He's not looking out for the little man. He's looking out for the people that put him in position and power right now. So if you
not in the midst of all of this stuff.
Well, you know, Holder resigned, of course, because of Fast and Furious, of course. He had to step down, had to get out of the way.
This time, though.
Oh, what's that?
Why did they have to bring that up at this time, though?
Well, I mean, because what happened was you had a group called Judicial Watch that filed Freedom of Information Act for them to hand over the files, and they were trying to sit on the files before this. Of course, they were hoping they could sit on it until after supposedly the midterm election. But a judge by the name of Judge Bates, if you look up Judge Bates, gave an ultimatum to Eric Holder, Obama, and the Department of Justice. He told them they had to hand those files over by October the 22nd. And they handed them over on October the 22nd, but that was the same night that they said that you had another fence jumper that jumped the White House fence, because most of the media still don't know the reason why Eric Holder had to step down, because of Operation Fast and Furious, in which the border agents were killed, and they had to admit that they were running guns from the ATF office in Phoenix, Arizona, down into Mexico. And then you had the assistant attorney general. His name is James Cole. He stepped down as well. So, again, Obama on that same night gave what is looked at as immunity, executive immunity to Eric Holder, but not only to Eric Holder, but to Eric Holder's mother-in-law and Eric Holder's wife, because they, too, were a part of covering up Operation Fast and Furious. But all this is at Judicial Watch. And most of the mainstream media hasn't talked about it. So Ferguson and some of these other stories almost have become a distraction from some of the biggest stories that's really going on in the country and in the world right now, because we're on the brink of World War III. And most people aren't talking about that at all. So, but when you look up Enbridge and Obama, I think it kind of makes things a little clear, because they have to go through the EPA to get these permits, because they're dealing with tar sand oil, which is some of the most heaviest oil that you can use in terms of this crude oil. And many of the environmental groups have come out against it. But
it's very toxic. It's very toxic.
Very toxic. Well, they had a big spill in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 2010. But again, all they did was pay a fine, and they're moving on with business as usual. But this is why Obama administration is talking about getting rid of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, because he's looking out for big business and big oil right now. He don't want anybody in the way of what it is that they want. So, you know, that's the bigger connection to Ferguson in Missouri. And the other part that you can't dismiss is that by them doing this fracking and this disturbing of the water, because they're going to need enormous amounts of water, and this all ties back into the story about them privatizing the Great Lakes, because they need that for the fracking. They need that for this tar sands. But that part of Missouri sits on the New Madrid fault line. So any little movement of the tectonic plates could really cause an earthquake like you've never seen before in that part of America. But this is what's been going on. And you remember in 2011 when they had all of the great floods of that part of the country. Well, after those farmers and the land was flooded out, the land was then given to the Army Corps of Engineers, and then they sold the land to Wall Street and the hedge fund owners, because they knew what was coming through that area would be ultimately those pipelines.
Right. Let me ask you something. So a friend of mine in Birmingham, Alabama, Calvin, very deep brother, a very deep researcher, he says when going over this particular information, he overheard you talking about the whole idea of regions. He said this brings to mind, what immediately comes to mind, he says, was the whole movie that's out called Hunger Games, and the fact that the new Hunger Games movie came out just this past week. They talk about regions. Can we tie that into what they're feeding the American people in reference to hidden in plain sight?
Well, I haven't seen the movie. I mean, with Hunger Games, but I know it is tied into, of course, a lot of Nazi symbolisms. The first one, the second one, and of course the third one as well. Just that old what's that bird called? The mockingjay is the bird, of course, that the Nazis use in Nazi Germany. Right. Of course, we know that this is the Fourth Reich right here inside of America right now. So we're looking at, outright fascism in terms of what Obama is pushing on the people right now, in terms of the marriage of the corporation with the government. And all of this ties back into everything else that they didn't want to push prior to the midterm elections. They wanted to hold till after the elections. And now they're opening up fast and furious or fast and serious on the American people, from the immigration that he talked about last week and giving amnesty to 4 million or 5 million, pardoning them essentially is what he's doing at a time of the year when governors and presidents should be pardoning prisoners, political prisoners, and those who may be in jail for nonviolent crimes. He's not doing that. And, of course, the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement that they're trying to push through, as well as the Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement. So all that is coming down on the people, and many of them have no clue of what is coming down right now.
Well, speaking of which, anytime I hear, especially dealing with FEMA and regions, this whole, martial law and, all of these supposed coffins that are being stored in different regions, quote unquote, of the country. Is this conspiracy theory, or is this something that is Ferguson a step towards leading towards this martial law? Can you really foresee this happening?
Absolutely, because they want that land where the people live at in Ferguson, and of course it ties into depopulation. They have to be able to, as we saw, again, looking back at history with Hurricane Katrina, strategic relocation of ethnic cleansing, moving the people out. Katrina means cleansing, in fact, that word Katrina. When they moved the people out by the thousands and tens of thousands. L.A. riots, L.A. riots or rebellions. I would bring to your attention, as the living legend Dick Gregory always references, the New York Times, May the 10th, 1992. There was a discrepancy in how many people were arrested and how many people were accounted for. When you read that article, New York Times, it talks about 18,000 people were arrested, but the state's attorney there said he could only account for 8,000 people. 10,000 people were missing, and to this day, they still haven't been able to account to what happened to those 10,000 black men and brown men at the height of the rebellions that took place in Los Angeles. So we have to be mindful of that, of what is going on in Ferguson, as you hear them talking about a region, because this is a regional move. And you got all of the same, again, as I said, scheme team that was in Los Angeles in 92, same ones that were in New Orleans in terms of private contractors. And what you saw last night, the National Guard, the U.S. military from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, all of them were in standby last night. So anything that happened, they wanted it to happen. You understand? That's what you call a standby, as they did in Benghazi when the U.S. ambassador Stevenson was killed. They were in standby mode. And so this is what we saw last night. Yes, sir. And so they're just running the script.
Right. So the gentleman that got fired because he was the one taking pictures of the Homeland Security trucks under the hotel.
Under the hotel, right.
Right. So how does that play into the thing, this whole idea of social media informing the people? Because, of course, the no-fly zone thing happened, but you can't do a no-tweet zone. You can't do
not at all. No. What is it? One of the best weapons we have right now is social media, and so we have to use it even though we know they're monitoring it, as our sister Zaza just talked about with her page, but we still got to use it to the best of our ability until they shut it down completely. So we have to do that. But in terms of Missouri, and I think that's why I say we have to do a war room, and we have to send out our experts that can go and do the research and bring it back and have the kind of conversation we're having tonight, because Missouri has so many tunnels. Missouri has so many caves that the people know nothing about. That they could, you just Google Missouri and tunnels or Missouri and caves, and you'll see what the government's been running and operating in Missouri. You have so many. They just built, and I don't know if you know, they just built a brand new nuclear plant in Kansas City, Missouri. They just opened it up in August. Brand new one, and unbeknownst to most of the people right now. But Missouri, it is the show me state because there's a lot that they have to show us if we take the time to do a little bit of, I think just a little bit of research, you could see what's going on. But this ties into, Griffiths, you talked about Agenda 21. This ties into that whole issue of growth and sustainability. It ties into what the Rockefellers was pushing, the green revolution, in which you come in and move the people off the land because there's a valuable asset to the land, as they're doing in Africa and other countries, but they're doing right here in America where blacks live. And so this ties right into that. As I referenced the FAA, they've been the ones that's been buying up all the land and then giving it to the St. Louis Lambert International Airport is what it is now. And so they've been taking more of the land from blacks and giving it up to them. And, again, as we're looking at what's happening with this case of Mike Brown, that I'm clear that that is part of their plan as well, in addition to the pipeline. And we'll have to come back another day and look at the role of Mike Brown's father, the role of Mike Brown's mother, because when I saw her the first week, since then we haven't seen that spark and just that genuine love of a mother until last night. So I'm asking, was she under mind control? Were they shooting her up with drugs? And what was really going on? But also, as we saw with Trey,
I'm sorry, what's that? The child.
Well, I think it was that, and then when you in court, fighting for your life, the attorney's going to tell you, do this, do that, don't do. She's playing. I think she was playing the script.
Yes,
last night she was on.
Yeah, but one of the things that kind of struck me was almost like Trayvon Martin's parents after Trayvon was killed. Of course, they settled out of court. They had a sealed settlement out of court, and they patented. I'm sorry.
That whole situation was real funny.
Yeah, it was.
Well, we got to look at Mike Brown and make sure the same thing's not happening over here as well, because they've already put a patent on the T-shirts that they were selling. And you know about the big fight between the mother and the grandmother, right? Where they beat the grandmother up because they were selling T-shirts.
Right. I thought
come on, brother. So you say, what's going on here? You understand? But so you got to look at that. But again, when you look at that whole element of what's going on there, some things that to me still hasn't been answered, as you talked about with the doctoring up of the videotape, Mike Brown being out on that ground, an ambulance didn't pick him up, a black SUV picked him up, and again he had a closed casket. So all of those raises even more suspicions for me, brother. You know what I mean? That why did they have a closed casket? Why wouldn't she not open it up as Emmett Till mom did? And there's just so many more questions. And if Darren Wilson wasn't the police officer, because this is about 3 different pictures I've seen of Darren Wilson now. So it's like the person keeps changing. Initially, that wasn't the name that we were given. You know what I mean? So this is the psyops I'm talking about. They control the information that's going in, so they can control what's coming out. And that's why I said we have to have our experts who will be willing to hit the ground and do the necessary research to say, let's give the people the real facts here, because we don't know what's been the real facts that's been given out to us. But they've been taking the people for a ride as far as playing on the people's emotions and socially engineering the people with the information. And then even with some of the demonstrations going on nationally, some of it is beautiful to see the young people out in the streets. You know what I mean? But then some of it we don't know, again, is it the young people or is those that have been seeding this, such as Sharpton, Agent CI7, the hardest working man in whole business, you know what I mean? That we know of. So we don't, we don't know. But that's all. I apologize just for my passion there. But please forgive me. But thank you.
No problem. I just wanted to add to that, Sabrina Fulton and her Trayvon Martin's father went and appealed to the UN at the race, whatever that racism conference is in Switzerland. And Michael Brown's mother recently did the exact same thing. So it's like, first of all, the UN really, like, it's almost like a ritual now.
Right.